Chapter 2, Key Issue 4, is about the epidemiological transition model, or really the spread of disease and the causes of death between developed and developing countries. And we're going to look at the causes of death and the major types of illnesses associated with each stage of that demographic transition model. And when we do that, we're using something called the epidemiological transition model. And it looks at the distinct health threats that are really focused in each stage of that demographic transition model. So we'll start with stage 1. Even though we know that there's no country today in stage 1, stage 1 is marked by large pandemics or epidemics. The cause of death for most people is going to be pestilence and famine, so lack of access to food and infectious diseases or parasitic diseases. There's a high birth rate, but the death rate is also really high, primarily because of these infectious and parasitic diseases. You have a high infant mortality rate. The high death rate means the population remains stable, so that NIR is low. And historically, like a disease in Europe that's a stage 1 disease would have been the bubonic plague. The stage 2, the epidemiological transition model, also would occur in stage 2, the demographic transition model. And at this point, you see a receding pandemic. So you have a crude death rate that's declining, and so even though people are still dying, and sometimes dying very young from the spread of infectious diseases, that the cause of that death is decreasing. And it could be because of improved sanitation, so sewer systems, access to clean drinking water, improved nutrition that can reduce the death from famine, and improved medical care. An example in the Western world of a stage 2 epidemiological transition disease would be the cholera pandemic in London in the mid-19th century. So again, here the birth rate is still really high, but the death rate starts to fall, decrease. And so as a result, the total population begins to increase. And again, the biggest care is increase in drinking water, increase in sewage care, increase in medical care. You can see that cholera is still a problem in the world today. And you can also look at most of these countries that have had cholera outbreaks are in stage 2, the demographic transition model. There's a couple of exceptions. You can see that China was a stage 3 country, but it still had an outbreak. India is mostly moving into stage 3, but it has that outbreak still. The outbreak here in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti results from the large earthquake. So after the large earthquake in Haiti, there was a cholera outbreak. And cholera had not occurred in Haiti for almost 100 years. And so the cholera pathogen was really brought into Haiti with UN peacekeepers who were there to help repair damage, rebuild homes. Because of the destroyed sewage lines, the cholera pathogen moved, with the fecal matter from the peacekeepers into the drinking water supply. And has led to a cholera outbreak that's, come and gone ever since. So after the earthquake, there's been several hurricanes, including Hurricane Matthew last year. And every time there's a large storm, it can kind of re-kick off that cholera outbreak. So it hasn't quite gotten under control yet. This is the map that Jon Snow, not the one from Game of Thrones, but the doctor in England, he made, showing where the different cholera outbreaks were, and that eventually led to him turning off the pump in the Broad Street, and led to him cutting off the cholera outbreak, because this was the well that was clearly infected with the pathogen. In stage 3 of the epidemiological transition model, which again will be occurring along with stage 3 of the demographic transition model, you have degenerative diseases. So your true death rate still is declining, but not as steeply. And you have a decrease in death from infectious diseases, but you have an increase in chronic disorders that are associated with aging, because people are living to an older age. And so you start to see a rise in death from things like cancer, heart attack, stroke, because people are living longer. And this is it here. The natural increase rate is still increasing until the birth rate starts to decrease. People are living longer. Stage 4, you have a low crude death rate, but it increases a little bit because you have an older population, and eventually the older population is going to die from degenerative diseases. And you're still going to see a majority of the deaths are going to be caused because of things like cancer and cardiovascular diseases. But people are living too much longer, and so they have a much higher life expectancy during stage 4. So for example, you can see where are people dying of cancer, and you see people dying of cancer in the US, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, most of Europe, China, but you don't see many males dying of cancer in countries where they're dying younger of infectious diseases still, or still more likely to die at a younger age of heart attacks. And so while cancer can occur anywhere, in areas where people live longer, cancer tends to be a larger cause of death. So we talked about the stage 5 demographic transition model. What kind of diseases and death do we expect in stage 5 for the epidemiological transition model? So what we, and again, this is a stage that where countries are just now entering, so a lot of these are hypotheses. But what we do see is the evolution of pathogens making new outbreaks occur. So we have things like infectious diseases. They have microbes that evolve and establish a resistance to drugs and insecticides. So things like antibiotic resistance tuberculosis could be a reason for a death in stage 5. Poverty. So you've got infectious diseases that would be more prevalent in poor areas because of unsanitary conditions. And so you might see diseases spreading in areas that have a large gap between the wealthy and the poor. And that could lead to different types of outbreaks. And you could see things like epidemics or pandemics become more common again in stage 5 because of the global mobility, how much people move around. And so we're moving diseases that were never present in one area to another. And so think about like Zika last year, how quickly Zika made it from Latin America up to regions and, like Texas and Florida in the United States. And while it wasn't serious here, it certainly was serious in Puerto Rico, which isn't far from here, geographically speaking. Also, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, so it is part of our country. So the rapid spread of diseases is something we might have to deal with. And you can see this, like this fear, this prediction from scientists when you look at a lot of popular culture, film, and movies, because things like zombies, zombie films and shows have become really popular again. Shows like TV shows about viruses, like the vampire virus and the guy on the boat with the new virus that's spreading all over the world. And so these kind of ideas have captured the imagination of people who develop our pop culture. And again, so stage 5, you're going to see natural increase rate decrease. And you could see the birth rate and the death rate stay even. Again, most of the reason for the declining natural increase rate or population decline here is low birth rate. But you could see a change in some of the diseases that pop up. So here's a map that shows you the new TB cases per every 100,000 people. And so you can see that tuberculosis is spreading faster than it was before. Here you see the percent of HIV-positive individuals between the ages of 15 and 49 in 1990. In some areas, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, you see that 1% or higher in 1990 of individuals ages 15 to 49 had HIV. In the U.S., we were just under 1%. And now if you look today, or in 2012, you can see the U.S. is at about the same rate. In some areas in Central Africa and Southern Africa have stayed about the same. Russia has increased rapidly. But some places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo have decreased. So either decreased or perhaps they're providing no data, so it could be about the same. So like South Sudan, we have no data on. But it would be cool if the Democratic Republic of the Congo had decreased. If you look at the United States, you can see the diffusion of HIV and AIDS. And so you can see in 1981, there were very few cases. They were primarily located in like New York, California, and Florida. By 1993, you can see the same, that places like California, Nevada, Texas, Florida, and the New York area, these are the areas with the highest rates of HIV and AIDS. In 2010, they still have higher rates in other places in the country, but it's certainly reduced again. And so if you look at this pattern here, this pattern mimics the number of people who are flying into the country. So areas that have the highest rates of HIV and AIDS infections are those with some of the biggest international airports. So you can see we talked about the increased connectivity changing disease patterns, and the diffusion of HIV shows you that. So why do some of these regions face healthcare threats or health threats? The access to healthcare is a big part of it. So healthcare conditions are going to be different all around the world because countries have different resources to care for people who are sick. When we look at expenditures on healthcare, more than 15% of the total government expenditures are spent on healthcare in Europe and North America, but less than 5% of government expenditures are spent on healthcare in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, which means that people in Europe and North America have more access to healthcare because the government's invested in it better. When you look at developed countries, you can see that healthcare in general is a public service that's available at little or no cost, so in like most European countries. And the government's going to pay more than 70% of healthcare costs in most European countries, where private individuals will pay about 30% of the expense, and sometimes just through their taxes. In developing countries, private individuals pay more than half the cost of healthcare. And in this case here, when we're looking at the expenditures, but personal expenditures for healthcare, see the United States is an exception to the general rule. So in the United States, private individuals are required to pay more than half, so about 50% of healthcare costs, which means our healthcare cost pattern makes the United States resemble a developing country as far as individual costs of healthcare, more than other developed countries. And you can see here like how much individuals spend on healthcare per person in this case. So per capita. Per capita means per unit, but in this case we're talking about per people, per person. And the U.S. is similarly ranked to Europe and other developed countries, but we just know that it's $1,000 and above. We don't know if it's coming out of pocket, so it doesn't show the difference. So if you looked at like individual differences between the U.S. and the other developed countries, you would see a stronger pattern. The U.S., our government still spends a high percentage of total government expenditures on healthcare, but we spend more as individuals than people in Europe and Canada would. As far as hospital beds per every 10,000 people, we're here between 30 and 49 hospital beds per every 10,000 people. Some countries in Europe are higher, some places are much lower, and in some places we don't have any data for, like Papua New Guinea. Physicians per every 10,000 people, the U.S. ranks at about 150 to 299 physicians for every 10,000 people. Some areas of the world have more doctors. Some areas of the world have far less. And in some areas of the world, like Western Sahara right here, there's no data collected at all. But if there's less than 50 doctors per every 10,000 people, then understand that like access to healthcare is going to be severely limited because you don't have doctors. You also don't have hospital beds, just like in the map from here we're looking at. So not just how much money you're spending or how much your government's investing, but how many hospital beds do you have? How many physicians do you have to care for people? So these things all make a big difference. Here you see private expenditure. So individuals, what are individuals spending on their healthcare? And you can see the U.S. is here you can see the U.S. is spending more money than Canada or Europe as individuals on our healthcare. And so here you can see we're spending the same amount of money as like people in Mexico, Brazil, Russia, Argentina, Chile. We don't quite expect our people to spend as much money on their own on healthcare as they would like in places like India. But we're spending more than most developed countries, and so that's a pattern we can maybe work on breaking.